It really doesn't matter what mall you go to, there's probably a department store Santa there. He's ready to take pictures with kids and pets. The mall usually has a whole winter setup for Santa and his elves. It's supposed to be a fun time for all involved. As wonderful as it is for most children to visit Santa, for some kids, it can be a nightmare. If your child is hurt while visiting Santa, it can haunt them for life. Whether Santa drops your child or your kid slips and falls while waiting in line, you may have a claim for damages. And that is exactly what happened to Matthew Morales as he waited with his parents to see Santa Claus. And he fell through the railing of the platform and fell about 3 to 4 feet to the floor because there were empty spaces between the railing. In the fall, Matthew Morales injured his head, which later resulted in epilepsy. In this insider-exclusive Justice in America Network TV special, Justice in America, Matthew Morales' Story, our news team sits down with Maxey Scherr, founder and CEO of Maxey Scherr Law, to discuss how she successfully represented Matthew in a very contentious case, which made it very difficult to obtain evidence and documents on this case as defendants refused to produce it. Maxey's firm had to get the court involved, and after a multitude of hearings, were finally able to get the proper documentation. Further, the extent of injuries were hotly contested, and the defendants hired multiple experts to discount the brain injury. Matthew was admitted into a clinic in another city to monitor him, and the seizures were indeed recorded. Maxey received maximum insurance policy limits from all defendants, and the matter was closed in 2013. Maxey has earned a reputation as an unyielding trial lawyer who repeatedly represents individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world, and repeatedly wins. And her amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate, just like in this case, continue to provide her clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive live from El Paso, Texas. It is my great pleasure to introduce Maxey Scherr and Robert Collins to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Maxey, tell us a little bit about your firm. What do you specialize in?
So my firm specializes in trucking crashes that result in brain injury or death. I've had my firm, I've been a lawyer for a long time now, coming on 18 years. And I've been involved in all different sorts of historic and landmark verdicts. And about 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, I started my own firm, and that's called Scherr Law Firm. I was one of the first women in this country that got board certified in truck accident law. And I've tried tons and tons of truck crash cases. I also went to school before law school for neuroscience. So I wanted to study to be a brain doctor and switched gears and went to law school. And so I've kind of combined my experience and my expertise into one area. And that is, like I said, truck crashes that unfortunately result in wrongful death or brain injury. And I help people all across the country that have been involved in that situation.
Tell our audience a little bit about your client, Matthew Morales, please.
Matthew Morales was 2 years old when he was really badly hurt. So you know how at malls they've got the Santa Claus pictures during the winter time of year? He was with his parents. He was 2 years old, and he was waiting in line with his parents to go take a picture with Santa Claus. And the mall that had the Santa Claus setup decided to put Santa Claus on an elevated stage. So it was like 6 feet off the ground.
So everybody could see it in the mall.
And around the stage, they had white picket fences to make it look like the North Pole. But in between the posts, they didn't have anything protecting the area that someone could fall through. And you know, who's going to take pictures with Santa Claus? It's not just big, tall adults, but it's little kids. And Matthew fell through the area in between those two white picket fences, and in between two of them, they were all over the place with no plexiglass, no anything. And he got knocked out and he hit the ground. And his mom ran down the stairs and picked him up, and he was unconscious for a while, and he had a big bulge on his head. And they took him to the emergency room immediately, and they diagnosed him with a hematoma to his head. And that bulge kind of got squishy and big, and a couple weeks later it went away, and that was that. And I was a brand new lawyer at the firm that I used to work at. And the lawyer before me had that case, and she left. So she wasn't at the firm anymore. I was a brand new lawyer. The case got transferred to me, and that's all I knew about the file. I knew that they had gone to mediation and that the notes reflected that he was filled with behavioral problems, is what the note said, behavioral problems. And at mediation, the defense had gotten to a maximum offer of $10,000. And the lawyer couldn't get the case resolved for the $30,000 that she tried to get it resolved for, because it was 2 weeks and a bump on his head is what it was, and a behavioral problem child, so they said. I called in the mom and the kid, and I spent the first meeting probably 6 hours with them to figure out what was going on. And what I learned was that the boy kept getting in trouble at school because he wasn't listening. And teachers would say stuff to him and he wouldn't respond. And they started seeing scratches on his arms. And they started seeing that he was injuring his cat. And that's why they said he had behavioral problems.
A lot of people don't know about your background. Prior to being a lawyer, you studied traumatic brain injury, didn't you?
Yeah, prior to being a lawyer, I went to school for neuroscience.
And this comes in to play here, in this case, and a lot of the cases that you're doing, because you recognize certain so-called behavioral problems as an indication of traumatic brain injury, right?
I've got education, experience, and training in things that a lot of lawyers don't have. And so when I heard these things, that he was scratching himself, or that he wasn't answering teachers, or that his behaviors had changed, and that he was injuring his cat, I really dug in to explore more about that. And I was not sure what was going on because I'm not a doctor, but it definitely raised red flags that these things were not just problems, but they were symptoms of brain damage that resulted from when he fell from 6 feet high, plus 2 feet, however tall he was, hit his head and knocked himself out, and hit his head so badly that he had a big hematoma for weeks. Those things don't usually just resolve and then you're good. And so it ends up that he, and this was a bit of a lapse in treatment, right? Because that was all he had, was that emergency room visit. And so I had recommended that they go find a pediatric neurologist. And at the time there were 2 in El Paso, and he went in and saw the both of them. And it ended up that the suspicions that I felt, kind of that spidey sense that I felt that something was wrong and something was related, were opined by his treating doctors to in fact be related. And it ended up, he wasn't scratching himself to be self-injurious, and he wasn't scratching the cat to be a bad kid. He was actually having tonic-clonic seizures. And what those are is your body, most people know grand mal seizures. Those are the kind where you shake and you foam at the mouth and you fall to the ground. But there are many different types of seizures. There are seizures where you can lose time and space out, and people can talk to you, clap their hands, say your name, and you don't come to until you come to. And you don't know that those things have happened. What I learned was that Matthew was having those. And there were times when his parents would come in and his fingers would be bent like this and his head would be turned a certain way. And they thought he was this was behavioral, right? This was a problem. And so what I learned from Matthew, this little kid, was that he would get this feeling. In medicine, it's called an aura. So he would get this feeling before the seizures would happen, and his body would tense up like this. And sometimes he would be holding the cat like for comfort, but then he would have the seizures and he would hold real tight. And those were seizures. He wasn't injuring the cat, or he would hold himself because it would burn inside when they were happening. And he wasn't scratching himself because he was a bad kid. he was having seizures of multiple different types. And so the doctors ended up putting him on anti-epileptic medication, and he was breaking through. He was still having seizures on these types of medicines. And on from there goes this crazy case, Steve, where they hired expert after expert after expert on the other side to opine that Maxey and his parents and I were making it up. And it was a crazy story about what happened next that I'd love to fill you in on.
Please do.
Some of the experts that they hired were doctors whose names I knew from school. One is like the godfather of pediatric neurology, is what we referred to him as when I was in school. And he wrote papers that my client was making it up, and that his parents were making it up, and that this was all lawyered, and this was secondary gain and malingering. And so I had the honor of deposing this man whose books I read 3 different times. And they were not treating doctors. They were not obligated to Maxey's care. And they ended up saying, you know, this was something that either was trivial, was the word that they used in Maxey's case, or nothing at all. And if it was a trivial episode, he would have resolved in 2 to 3 weeks. And I was talking to them at their depositions, all these different experts, about the fact that he's having seizures. The doctors have diagnosed him with epilepsy. He's on anti-epileptic medication, and he's still breaking through and having seizures. His teachers have seen it. His school nurse has seen it. In fact, this very kid got authorized to go to a camp out in East Texas for kids in Texas that have epilepsy. So he had to prove to the camp, his parents, that he had epilepsy. And once he did, he got a full ride scholarship to go to this camp. And there were a couple of kids in El Paso who had it and who got approved to go to this camp. And so he had a camp counselor who did the transportation for these kids to East Texas so that the scholarship could afford people all on this side of Texas to get out there. It's a big state. And everyone at the camp had epilepsy, not just the students, but the camp counselors, et cetera, et cetera. And so this camp counselor who drove him from El Paso also saw Maxey have a seizure. And when the lawyers and the defense kept saying, this is made up, this is all lawyered, this is the parents, this is secondary gain, I set for deposition every person that wasn't a lawyer or a parent that had seen Maxey have these types of seizures. And one of them was this camp counselor. And at the camp counselor's deposition, he said, I know what seizures look like. I have epilepsy. I've got a device installed in my heart that bypasses seizures because stress triggers my seizures. And that deposition got really, really, really testy. And at one point, one of the defense lawyers was being really antagonistic with him. And I will never forget the moment that that camp counselor had a seizure during the deposition. And he told us that he hadn't had a seizure in years because you lose your license if you have a seizure. And he hadn't had one in years. He's learned how to regulate it. He's got this device. And the depot got so ugly that he had one there. And the ambulance had to come. And I was on the ground with him. So the ambulance took him away, and on goes this case, right? So there is a hospital in Houston called Texas Children's Hospital. And they've got an EEG department for children who have seizures. And at that department, and it is known as the best in the country. It is up there. It's even better than the hospital that the doctor in New York works at that said that this kid was making it up. And so he, the doctor in New York, said, hey, if your kid goes on an EEG, your client, and it ends up he's got a seizure, I will retract all of my opinions. And so we found the best hospital for this was in Houston, Texas. And the mom, through the insurance, got him a bed for 1 week at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston. And she and Maxey went out there and they took him off the medication slowly to see if this 24-hour monitoring facility would record him having a seizure. And she was there for a week with Maxey. He was off his meds. He was recorded for 24 hours a day for 7 days. And I won't forget the phone call she made at the end of the 7 days because I didn't hear anything from her. And she said, "We're going home. Matthew didn't have a seizure." And I said, "You know what? Thank God. Thank God. Because those hurt these kids. Every seizure hurts them. Come home." She called me about 2 hours later and she said there was another kid who was going to come take this bed, but he didn't show up and they're offering Matthew the bed for another week. We're going to stay. And I said, "Okay, well, let me know what happens." And the next day I got a phone call that Matthew was starting to have uncontrollable seizures. And so in that case, we ended up getting it resolved for a lot, a very just amount, a very just, very large amount for him. And I will not forget that case ever, because when we were sitting in the mediation, besides all the things I've already told you, when we were sitting in the mediation, the parents of Matthew knew that the camp counselor who had his seizure on camera lost his license, and he could no longer do the transportation for the El Paso kids to go to epilepsy camp in East Texas. And they knew that he hired a lawyer for what that lawyer did to him during the deposition. And they said, "We're not resolving this case for the big amounts in front of us unless he is also taken care of." And that's what happened.
That's good.
The incessant drip of lies and misinformation from the insurance defense cartel is exactly what you just heard about, and it happens in every case.
You have been practicing law for almost 50 years, right?
Almost.
Knowing what you know about a very imperfect legal system, what drives you to continue doing this?
It is not just imperfect, it is under attack. If we are able to preserve it, then it still works. Maxey and I prove this every time we go to trial. It still works, but you have to get past that drip, constant drip of misinformation and the belief of most people that there's some truth to it. Most people will immediately buy the suggestion that, oh, this is just to get money. I have never represented a single plaintiff who wouldn't trade their position for every dollar they had. A parent who's lost a child and they're just in it for money. I sometimes talk about the malingering wrongful death survivor, because it's almost that ridiculous that the industry calls people malingerers and fakers. It's total bullshit. And that's how we win the cases, is by telling the truth and by exposing that bullshit.
Yeah. When you select your juries, this is to both of you, right? What are you looking for? And are you your own juror expert? What are you looking for to have the right people on the jury?
So I'll say I've been practicing law almost 18 years, and nothing has been like the last 3 years for me. I've been fortunate enough to have found my friend and my mentor in Robert Collins. And I would say that I've learned so much from him in ways that I can't describe, but I'll tell you this. My son is going to law school now. He's graduating in a couple of weeks, and he has seen the difference in me, and he credits his changed decision to now go to law school instead of medical school to Robert Collins. And what I have learned from Robert is that there's no quote unquote secret sauce. It's just being yourself. It's just being yourself, being authentic and telling the truth and exposing the games for what they are. And I've really loved being a lawyer, and I love trying cases with people who have the calling like Robert, because it's not a game. It's not a system on our side. It's a cause.
Many years ago, I was faced in a case where a girl at 18 died on the night of her high school graduation because the Hyundai vehicle at that time did not have a shoulder harness in the back seat. It had only a lap belt. Everybody else in the car walked away. They had shoulder harnesses. She died as a result of it. An expert was created for the defense in that case, a woman who had been an intern for a senator, who was then appointed by Ronald Reagan to be the head of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. She'd never been involved in highway safety. She had no experience whatsoever in saving lives or in caring about saving lives. And I remember that she was adamant in her position in the case that this automaker had no responsibility for what happens in its vehicles, until I asked her what the calling was that brought her to be the nation's leader in highway safety and automobile safety. And she couldn't answer the question. She retired from the business. She did not testify in the case, and she's never testified again.
What was her name, by the way?
Diane Steed. The people on that side of the case who are willing to do it for years, for the millions that they're paid, are essentially dishonest. When they claim that someone has taken a test and they've been proved to be a malingerer, that's totally dishonest. It's like saying that there are millions of people getting Social Security checks who are over the age of 150. No, they're not getting checks. Yeah, their name's still on the rolls. Well, that's dishonesty to suggest that they're still getting checks. Just like it's dishonesty to suggest that someone who answers the question, do you have headaches, who has been diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury, if they answer yes, will be labeled a malingerer. The actual test that's used by the insurance defense cartel to claim in court that somebody's a malingerer with a brain injury asks that question.
This gets back to my original question about choosing jurors. I am sure that every judge in this country that's been on the bench for some time hears this crap all the time, and he just kind of brushes it off, right? Jurors, do you find them astute enough to be able to, life experience, do you find them astute enough to be able to see the same thing that you're saying right now?
What we find and believe, and I know as a fact, is that most jurors take their job very seriously. They want to do the right thing. They have received that drip, drip, drip of propaganda their whole life. So they walk into the courtroom having a bad attitude about what they're going to experience. And it's up to us to identify the people who can, and it's very difficult to do, put that aside. And we find actually that it's counterintuitive, that what you would think to be the conservative jurors who will not give a lot of money to someone who's harmed, that's not true. Once we expose to them the manner in which rules were knowingly, deliberately broken for profit, they put the hammer down on the defendants. That's where the nuclear verdicts come from. I was interviewed by a national organization of insurance companies about why are there all these nuclear verdicts?
Meaning big verdicts.
What's happened? Yeah, well, from our perspective, meaning true justice. Okay? It's perspective. And I tell them every time, it's because the case should have been settled, and yet because you win cases that you should lose, you're willing to make the risk. For you, it's Las Vegas. For them, it's Las Vegas. They're rolling the wheel every time they go to the courthouse.
Well, congratulations again on the confidential settlement. And had it not been for your knowledge of traumatic brain injuries, I'm sure they wouldn't have been able to settle it for the amount of money that's confidential anyway.
Yeah, not just my knowledge. I was lucky enough to get that schooling, but I've been around greats my whole life. And I've gotten to see people pick juries and serve great justice my whole life. And I have been rejuvenated by the great Robert Collins, and my dad is a great lawyer. And so it's instilled in me, and it's not all me. We're all part of the team that's on the right side for the right reasons. And when the jury hears that, sees that, and knows it's authentic, then justice is really served.
You know, it's interesting when I see cases on TV, for example, you know, they have a news blurb, somebody was killed, and everybody says one thing, we want justice. You know, I think that's inherent in the human nature. You know, It is only when you are being paid a lot of money on the defense side, right, that you don't give a damn.
Well, and what we've done is we've decided that justice is served in the form of money. And so it's easy to attack the plaintiff as being greedy because it's all about money. But what we do is we backchain. Yeah, it was all about money from the very beginning. When they decided not to have a safety director, when they decided not to give safety training to the truck driver, when they decided to hire a guy who lied about all the people he had injured previously, when they decided to put a vehicle on the road that should not be there, it's all about money.
Well, I want to thank both of you for your time, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.